My name is Tim Jackson. On behalf of Mars, I want to welcome you here this evening for our talk, which is titled Harnessing the Power of Self-Interest for Collective Impact. But before I introduce our speaker and our moderator, I do want to thank Social Innovation Generation, or otherwise known as SIG, who are our partner in this series and have pulled together a series of Canadian speakers for the balance of the year. In May, Alet Mansky will be here to talk about the Registered Disability Savings Plan, which he helped co-found. Later in the year, we'll have Jeff Cape from Evergreen, and Tim Jones, the Director of Artscape, will be here later in the year as well. A quick reminder, we would love you to tweet during the event. The hashtag is MarsGL for the rest of the evening. Before I introduce our speaker, I just will take a minute to introduce our moderator. After Tonya's finished, Catherine Porter will moderate a discussion and reflect on what Tonya has said. Catherine is a social justice columnist at The Star. She writes about issues such as climate change, poverty, women's rights, mental illness, international development. She's won 2 national newspaper awards for her work. But I think most relevant for tonight, she is a community builder and a social innovator, doing work on the Danforth here locally as well as abroad. She was sent to cover Haiti, and as a result of that, has spent time working with her readers, has raised money from Star readers, educated more than 200 students, and I understand in January came back from her 20th trip to Haiti. So we're thrilled to have her with us this evening, and a perfect moderator. So I have a biography of Tonya that I could read to you, and I'm not going to do that. I think most of you know that Tonya is the founding CEO of the Center for Social Innovation and has been involved with a variety of different social enterprises and activism for a number of years. And I could read through the list of awards and accolades that Tonya has received, things like being an Ashoka Fellow and the like. But I thought what I'd do instead is I'd just tell you about the first time I met Tonya. I had been involved with some people in Waterloo Region who were looking to create a new entity to help support social entrepreneurs in the nonprofit sector. And as we went through the journey of trying to figure out how we should go about this and who we should talk to, we kept being told we needed to go down to Spadina Avenue in Toronto, and we needed to go see CSI. And so Jennifer King, who ultimately became the executive director of Social Venture Partners Waterloo Region, and myself made the trip to downtown Toronto, got to Spadina and got in the elevator. And when the elevator door opened on, is it the 4th floor, Tonya? On the 4th floor, it was incredible to us to hear and to feel the energy that existed at CSI. And we spent the next hour and a half or so with Tonya. And as she took us through, and we met entrepreneur after entrepreneur who told us about what CSI had done for them, and more importantly, what Tonya had done for them. And I think when we went back to Waterloo Region, what we took with us was that here was someone who had a vision to do something in Toronto, and you had to do nothing more than see the elevator doors open to feel the impact she's had on that community, and obviously has now extended that down to New York and across the globe. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Tonya Surman.
You're so sweet.
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Good evening. Hi, everyone. I'm really, really excited and honored to be here, and it's so nice for me to see so many familiar faces around the room. And I'm a little bit nervous tonight because I'm actually going to be talking on a topic that is kind of new to me. Generally, you hear me repeating the same kinds of things, and this was just such an incredible opportunity and such a gracious invitation from the folks at SIG that I really wanted to push myself and hopefully be able to work with you to push the conversation around social innovation a little bit further. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about the power of self-interest to achieve collective impact, which I hope is a little irritating to you. So for whom does this feel just a little awkward? Okay, thank you. Okay, good. I know what I'm dealing with. And just to make me feel a little bit more comfortable, how many people in the room would sort of give me would say that they're on the nonprofit side of the social change work? Great. And how many people would say that they're more on the for-profit side? Well, welcome to you intrepids for-profiters. It's wonderful to have you. All right, I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to tell you where it all began for me. How many people are familiar with the Whole Earth catalog? Right. This was an amazing publication that started in 1968. And the Whole Earth catalog was a quintessential example of what was happening at that time. There was essentially a counterculture movement that was emerging, at least here. And what you started to see was that the status quo was no longer okay. You were starting to see the creeping in of new ideas, questioning the industrial era and starting to really think differently about how we should be living. I actually want to show you, you can't probably see it, but on the back page, the Whole Earth catalog, that one side, the title, and on the back page it says, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." Lots of people attribute that quote to Steve Jobs, but I got to tell you, this is where he got it from. What they were looking at is they were looking at whole systems, communities, households, counterculture, intentional communities. They were looking at communications, media, the use of technology in the world. And it was an important time. It was, for me, an important time because I was being raised by this crazy fool. This guy up here is my dad. That's Ken Hantro. This is the School of Music. And you'll see, if anybody knows anything about music, that's a B3. And ironically has a keyboard with no keyboard in it. And he's ripped the innards out of that. I had the incredible privilege of being raised by a hippie, a raving lunatic counterculture, conspiracy theorist, right-wing, left-wing hippie. And to this day, he is still my most important inspiration because he taught me that we could shape our world. He taught me that there were no limitations but what our own imaginations could imagine. When I think about how important his and my process of growing up, I remembered key moments in time for me that were so very pivotal. This is 1989 and the Berlin Wall falling down. How many people remember that? Oh, you old people, thank God, I'm not the only one. And this is so important for me because this was a moment where I sort of struggled, my inner struggle between capitalism, socialism, communism, I was a Cold War baby. I lived like so many others in fear that the world was going to hell in a handbasket. And when the Berlin Wall came down, it was this symbolic moment when freedom reigned, but what for me that was really capitalism. And I struggled with this question. How do we understand capitalism when we're supposed to be caring for one another? And how do we hold that balance? And it really marked the beginning of a process for me of exploring how we use the power of markets to change the world. This was exacerbated by another profoundly important evolution for me, and I think for many others, was the introduction of climate change. Climate change was one of our first truly global challenges. It was one of the challenges when we realized that we had no choice but to think differently about the systems which held us in place. Systems change. Systems change. We talk about systems change, we talk about social innovation, we've got this language here, but what are we really talking about? Lots and lots of people have been trying over the last 30 years to reimagine the economy, to figure out how we change this system. We moved from the industrial era to the service economy, to the knowledge economy, and now we're jumping into the sharing economy and the social economy, the circular economy and the local economy. What do these things all have in common? We're all struggling for new ideas. We're all deeply trying to understand how to harness the power of these markets and be able to start to think differently about systems change. We're so many of us here looking to rethink and ultimately to redesign. And so what I want to share with you tonight is a few of my teeny tiny experiments in redesign. It's funny, yesterday we had a branding consultant come into the organization, and there was a question that he asked, are you a builder or an architect? And my answer was, I'm a designer. I'm a designer because I like to simply kind of think about what it might look like. Imagine that imagination. My dad, again. For 25 years, I've been looking at and using my power of design to look for patterns. One of the most important facilities that a social innovator has is the ability to see patterns, to recognize things that connect us. And so I'm going to give you the punchline. Here it is. This is it. This is the takeaway from the talk tonight. Need, shape, and impact. Get it? No problem. Right? Good? No. So let's just talk about what that looks like. What the heck does she mean? I thought I'd start with Salad Club. How many people know or have heard of Salad Club? All right, good. So what's cool about Salad Club? Well, it's really awesome because it's a really simple concept. What is Salad Club? Salad Club is where a bunch of people who have really old vegetables sitting in their fridge and a hungry belly at lunch come together to co-create a salad bar and ultimately have a bit of a conversation. So there it is. Need, shape, impact. Let's get a little bit more complicated. This is a spectacular photo of my baby, who's now taller than me, but I really love the photo. So this is a picture of his best friends. Back when my babies were little, I worked with an incredible group of women, and men, actually, parents, who were all faced with a very real challenge. Childcare runs about $1,200 a month in this city. It's ridiculously expensive. I didn't really know how to balance it all. I felt terrible giving my baby to a complete stranger in this giant room with a whole bunch of other kids and not knowing whether they were going to be cared for. And so I was faced with a very real need. Along with other parents, what do you do? How do we do this childcare thing differently? Well, some of these creative parents got together and we created a new model of childcare, a cooperative daycare model. What was the shape of it? Well, the model was simply each one of us was willing to dedicate one duty day, and we were able to hire a professional early childhood educator, and for $500 a month, instead of $1,200 a month, we were able to have an amazing teacher, phenomenal parents in that space, a 3-to-1 ratio for childcare, and we were able to create ultimately not just a childcare solution, but a village which has lasted with my children and my family, my community, a village that has been co-created over the last 20 years. Well, 15 is really to be accurate. So what's important here? Need, shape, impact. So we're getting the hang of it here. I'm sure you guys know about this place, a little place called the Center for Social Innovation. So what is this about? Well, CSI, as most of you know, is all about connection. But what we were really trying to do is we had identified a need. We knew that nonprofit and social mission organizations needed access to facilities. We knew that they needed to connect with one another. We knew that we needed to be able to work across boundaries. So what did we do? We identified that need and we created a model or a shape of doing things. We like to call it a platform. Effectively, though, it's really about rules and tools. How many people know anything about the gaming world? Not a soul. Oh, good, one. Claire, awesome, fabulous. When you go into the gaming communities, you'll see that they have something called rules and tools. Culture and platform. So what you've got here is you've got the ability to connect with another, and the sort of game. The game is clear. So the Center for Social Innovation is concretely, right now, the need is clear. We're serving 800 social innovation organizations. We facilitate and provide services through one single platform, and the impact is that we are supporting a culture of change. How many people are familiar with the community bond? Oh, good, you've all got little postcards on there. I can't help myself. The community bond, very simply, the Center for Social Innovation wanted to buy a building. We had a need. The need was money. $4.3 million of it, actually. And so what we did is we created a new shape, an investment vehicle that allows unaccredited investors to be able to generate a 4% return, as well as supporting an organization that they believe in. The result, a new building. Are you getting bored yet? It's the last example, and this one's a little complicated. I put this at the end because I think it starts to get into a little bit more detail about what is the shape, what goes into the shape. In 2000, a group of 11 organizations came together from childcare, healthcare, and environment. We were all competing for funding with the same, from the same foundation. And what was quite remarkable was that the foundation basically said to us, hey, you guys are all competing for this funding. What we want you to do is think about how you could actually work together. So the question became, how do we find a way to see commonality across this multi-sectoral divide? The childcare organizations were very, very focused on direct service delivery. The environmental organizations were quite advocacy focused and very, very determined to get at that policy, that toxics policy. And the healthcare organizations were absolutely obsessed with ensuring that the peer review process was on consistently, time over time. We had an incredible opportunity facilitated by this foundation and the Trillium Foundation. They allowed us a 6-month period to think about how we wanted to work together. These 11 organizations came together, and we basically spent the first time together complaining recklessly about all the things that were broken about partnerships. Yeah. What was fascinating was that it was all about power. It was about power, it was about ego, it was futility and frustration, because we felt that as soon as you created a group or an organization, what would happen is the person who decided to assume that leadership role would consume all of the power and the energy. And you would have the incredible momentum that was occurring within a group of people who shared a common interest. They would start to lose interest. The energy would leave the room with one of two things. Either one person would take on too much responsibility, too much leadership, and it felt like there was a vacuum, or even worse, they'd hire their first staff person. And what happens is the minute you hire that first staff person, you're this coalition, you hire that person, and all of the energy, you're like, okay, I'm done now. That person is going to do it all, magically do it all. So one of the questions is, how do we redesign partnership? How do we fundamentally question why we should work together, what it is that we want to connect to, And what's in it for us? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? These are like the nasty, dirty words of the nonprofit sector, right? There's the word sales. That's brutal. You're not allowed to use that word. Or marketing, because that's almost as bad. But the question, what's in it for me? It's like heresy. But we asked it. And we asked it because what we were looking for was a clear answer to the question, what do we agree on? Not what do we disagree on, but what do we agree on? CIPCHE, Canadian Partnership for Children's Health and the Environment, so I'll refer to it now as CIPCHE. CIPCHE was an amazing organization of folks who came together because they realized that the only way that they were going to be able to achieve collective impact is if we put everybody's self-interest on the table. If we could build the kind of social capital in this group of 11 to 15 people, which is basically the number that we worked with, if we could build the trust and the clarity about people's core competency, about their strategic direction, about what brought them both personally and professionally to the table, all of a sudden we had a transparency on what was really happening on this ecosystem that nobody else really understood. So there's some important words here. Ecosystem, thinking like a system. We were looking and trying to understand our own role in this. How do we balance the competition that exists within an organization when you've got an incredibly senior policy leader who does not have a PhD, who is constantly having to educate and engage with the PhDs and never gets put on the stage because she doesn't have the credentials? Right? How do we manage the political dynamic when one organization is a complete advocacy organization, but they're working in partnership with a public health agency, and some people can say things and some people cannot? How do we deal with money? My favorite. How do you deal with an organization who's a coalition of people who are trying to actually raise money, but that the minute that you start putting in a funding proposal, somebody has to hold the money? And if they hold the money, then they hold the power. How do you balance power? So we spent 6 months developing this little number. Please don't try to understand it. It's really, there's a website, you can learn it. But I think what it does is it offers to you a shape. We had clear need, but we had to create a shape that could balance power. We had to create a way of understanding how to balance chaos and order. And more than anything, we wanted to tap into the power of self-interest. I wanted to make sure that we were biasing for leadership, that we were not falling into broken governance models and appropriate partnership models and process. We wanted to make sure that we were leveraging this incredible energy called momentum and drive. And so what we did is we came up with a governance model, the constellation governance model, where what we did is we divided and we understood and built a model that put the chaos into the top half, the order into the second. Self-interest went at the top, and collective interest went into the bottom. And what we did is we asked the people who hung together in that collective interest space to wear their collective interest hats and to act as acupuncturists, leveraging the power of the self-interest that existed in the action-focused constellations. It's pretty complicated, so I'm not going to go into it any further, but to say it taught me so much. And what it resulted in was this ragtag group of environmentalists, healthcare, childcare activists coming together and engaging in 2007 in a multi-stakeholder process in 6 cities across the country, working with the other, the chemical producers, the consumer products makers, the federal government, the provincial governments. And in 2008, the government of Canada announced the banning of BPA in baby bottles, and it marked a global market transformation as a result of our ability to balance power and to leverage the power of self-interest for collective benefit. So, need. What is it? Why in the nonprofit sector do we feel so dedicated to forgetting about it? How come we are so afraid of the word self-interest? How do we tap into that need? So I'm going to use a couple words here that I sort of see as obviously different, massive generalizations, but important. For me, the need is a placeholder for self-interest. Self-interest is really the embodiment of drive. Right? It's quite simple. We need to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves, and we have certain physical needs, emotional needs. And so the question becomes, what gets us up? What gets us going? Self-interest creates drive. Drive creates movement. Movement is profound, and we consistently forget it. When we were developing the constellation model, we developed a concept that I called the magnetic attractor. The magnetic attractor is the embodiment of a threat or an opportunity. A magnetic attractor defines an ecosystem. So let's say with toxics, we identified that toxics and children's health was our magnetic attractor. We needed to do something about this issue. And so what became very interesting is not to go through the traditional partnership model where you say, well, who do we want to work with? But the minute you put out a threat or an opportunity, what is fascinating to see is who thinks they're in that ecosystem. So it's no longer who you want to be in the ecosystem, it's who's in it, who thinks they're in it. I didn't think that the Canadian Chemical Producers Association was going to see themselves in it. I didn't see that the mining industry and the perfume industry would see themselves in it, but they did. They saw themselves in this ecosystem. The question that's so powerful here is if you can understand what the magnetic attractor is, then you can understand how to harness the energy and the self-interest. And you can start to align those self-interests for collective impact. For me, this powerful concept of chaos is probably one of the most important ideas that we can see. The internet taught me so much about how to imagine these things. The internet, crazy, nutty, everybody's doing their own thing. There's all of this energy, it's all sort of loose connections. And then the question becomes, how do we, as change agents, how do we start to create order out of the chaos? What is the process of taking that chaos, that energy, and not losing that energy, but harnessing it for social impact? And for me, the answer is shape. Shape. How do we start imagining different shapes? Different shapes that are designed to aggregate self-interest, to see differently how we can engage individuals, organizations, people who you may not even like and may not ever want to work with, but they see their own self-interest in this conversation. And so how do you start to create a shape which holds that difference? Because until we start to understand greed, envy, self-interest, we're not going to be able to create the new structures or the new shapes that are leveraging that incredible drive to be able to get at the change we want. And so it comes to us reimagining. I could do a whole presentation on the next topic, which is the answer to the question, like, which shape? Which shape shall we create? And quite honestly, I think that every single organization, every problem that we're trying to solve will ultimately have different shapes that need to be developed. And this is where our imaginations are profound. But here are some of the ones that I think really add an incredible amount of value in my own thinking. Self-organization. The world is too big. It is too much chaos. We can't expect that any governance model, business model, or system is going to be able to do it all. And so what we need to do is we need to design the shapes of the future, the structures of the future for self-organization. People need to be able to do it themselves. CSI actually is completely leveraging this, right? We don't actually, one of the big conversations that we have at CSI regularly is this question of like, what is our accountability to our members? At what point does our responsibility for them stop and start? We can create the platform, we can facilitate the connections, we can, create the right kind of culture for that kind of thing, but we can't make them successful. We can't actually do that. They have to do that themselves. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that the shape and the systems that we create enable them to be self-organizing. Another very powerful one, and one that we see being emulated in a lot of really interesting systems, the green energy one in particular, is distribution. It's about how we understand how energy flows. The center is in transformation. There are now going to be multiple centers. There needs to be multiple centers. We need to build distributed systems, systems that move the power into the periphery or where it needs to be when it needs to be there. We need to be able to build systems that exist for need and then disappear when we don't need that anymore. Another one I don't have a slide for in here, but it occurs to me it's so critical to distribution systems is fractals. The ability to understand, and I wish Liz Reichert were here, she's amazing on the fractals analysis, but really fractals are the ability for one module to be replicated again and again and again without losing its impact. Another powerful design principle for creating sustainable shapes is alignment. How do we create virtuous cycles and virtuous systems? So how are our different activities positively reinforcing one another and not just draining energy out of the system? I can almost sort of imagine in my head how that would work, where you make sure that there's no dead end, that an activity doesn't have a dead end, that it's constantly creating new energy in that system. Because that's the only way that we continue to bring life and energy to these ideas and activities that we're involved in. And perhaps my favorite, because of course I am still an entrepreneur, is that action is cheaper than control. And we must bias for action. Our systems too often are too rigid, too structured, are not adaptive, are not resilient. And we fundamentally need to reimagine how we can actually bias for action. Momentum is the most powerful thing we've got going for us. The last thing you want to do is miss a great opportunity. What was it that Richard Branson quote? Oh, and I can't believe I'm quoting him, but I'm going to. But it's it's something to the effect of, when you see a great opportunity, grab it. Even if you think you're not ready or able to do it, you'll figure it out as you go. Super, super important. One of the greatest impacts that I think our rules and our systems have is to slow us down, because we bias for control over initiative. How do we create systems that bias for initiative and not control? So, the big concept for me, and I guess the big takeaway that I offer to you, is really about holding the tension. In each of the examples that I gave you, the pattern here is about understanding the balance between structure and flow. I did this on my chalkboard because I couldn't figure out any nice pictures for you, but here's how it works in my brain. Structure and flow. You need to create structures which enable flow. And so when we start to imagine and dream of what those structures should, might, could look like, how do we ensure that they enable instead of disable? And what is that balance, and how do we, as practitioners, hold that tension constantly? And this is really an important concept for me, and I think maybe I'm still evolving my thinking on this. You know, one of the things that consistently drives me a little bit mental when I have an opportunity to read literature is they talk about all of these systems, but nobody acknowledges the motivation behind them. What creates the movement? What causes the development of a process? What triggers an action? When we can understand how energy informs those structures and flows, then we have the beginnings of understanding how to create resilient systems, systems that will actually be responsive, self-organizing, healthy, authentic, adaptive. Too many of our systems were developed with an industrial model in our head, and now the challenge is how do we create systems which are as adaptive as we are as humans to take us through the next stage of our evolution. Magnetic attraction, the motivation, the drive, the self-interest, applied to the change that we want to see and filtered through a balance of structure and flow. Just like nature, the systems are profoundly perfect. The structure that holds the river and the flow of the river over that structure seamlessly enabling. And so just back to my dad. So I had to, because like it was so cute. Like looking at 1970s pictures is like adorable, right? And you know, he changed my life. He's nuts. He's crazy. And he taught me that anything is possible. He taught me that I was only limited by my imagination. He told me and he taught me that we have the ability to shape our world. And fundamentally, we all have the ability to shape our world. And it truly is up to us to be the defenders of people and planet and to create new shapes that hold authenticity, justice, fairness, equity, prosperity, and sustainability in everything we do. And the only limit is your own imagination. And I'll leave it at that. Now Catherine gets to grill me.
I wonder if mine's on. Oh, it is on. Can you hear me? There's a giant clock up here.
It's really intimidating.
Yeah, it's very intimidating.
And I don't know when I started, so.
Well, we have 41 minutes and 16 seconds left.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Catherine Porter. I write a column for The Star and some features, and I've written a few columns about what you do, which is how I ended up here, I guess. But it's a pleasure to be here. Well, my head's kind of spinning. I think that maybe we could go back to what you were saying about maybe think again to my question that I always ask you when I interview is how you, when there's a bias for action, it means you take huge risks.
Yeah.
So maybe you could tell us about some of the bigger risks you've taken and how you scaffold yourself enough, or whether you just leap, like Richard Branson said, and then how you deal when you really screw it up, and some of your bigger failures, maybe.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Catherine.
So maybe we'll start with
We'll start with the
risk and how you deal
So
with it.
you know, it's a funny thing about risk. I don't know that I actually understand it fully. Because risk assumes you have something to lose, in my mind. And I think one of the things that I've been blessed with is, in this field, we have so little to lose. Like, why aren't we taking more risks? To me, it's antithetical. And so I really have to say, people say, oh, you take risks, you're a risk taker. Maybe. But I think one of the things is, first of all, I only take calculated risks. I don't gamble at all, period. I can't handle it because the fear of loss is too great. I can't stand not winning. It's ridiculous. So, so the thing that's fascinating is that you have to have something to lose for it to be a risk in my mind. And so I think my scaffolding around that is a couple things. Our team, surrounding myself with incredible people, is the most important part of our scaffolding and in any risk that I take, and a fundamental belief in our own ability to adapt. So I actually think that people don't take risks because they're insecure, they're afraid that if something bad happens, they're not going to be able to know how to respond. And I guess I just feel enough confidence in myself and in our capacity as an organization to be able to know that no matter what happens, we have the resilience and the social capital and the relationship and the experience and expertise to be able to respond. And so it's a really important, it's a really important thing. It's not that I don't fear failure. I absolutely fear failure, but I fear not trying way more.
Huh. Okay, but how much did you have to raise for the building, the second building?
Yeah, we're not done yet.
Bonds,
yeah.
What is it?
4.3 million.
Okay, so that's a pretty big risk. And at some point you must have thought, and I know you did, what if I don't raise the money? And what if we don't get the bonds? That would be a fairly significant failure. I'm just taking it through my head if I was you. Pretty big failure, lots of mud on my face. People won't believe in me anymore.
Yeah.
Don't you guys all have those voices in your head, that evil voice that says all these things? Everyone will know I'm full of it and that I'm a fake and I'm bluffing all along.
Well, so how did my talk tonight, I was convinced everybody was going to think I was an imposter. So, that's still
the
there.
Imposter complex.
Yeah, imposter. For sure. There's a risk of failure. And I guess in matters like this, I guess there's a lot of things. One is that I have an incredible director of finance and operations, Karine Jewish, who's right there. That woman, that incredible, resilient woman. And when we looked at the risk associated with failure, we're like, well, we can figure it this way, or we could figure it this way, and we'd scenarioized and we planned, and I knew we had each other. Right? And I knew that we had our team, and Dill's here and our community bonds team, and so, I figured no matter what happens, I'll be in it with other really good people. So if we fail, we'll fail together. And I was like, okay. And I'm also, I guess I just believe in a great story. And, if you're coming from a place of true authenticity and you're really trying to do something good, even when you fail, that's a part of the journey too. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about some of your failures? One of my, there are really many. I'm trying to think of a really good one. I operate like spaghetti on a wall, right? And so, is it failure or is it just that it didn't stick? Here's one, full disclosure to all the people in the room that makes me feel a little bit awkward, but, we launched a crowdfunding platform that did not work. Right? We launched a crowdfunding platform about 2 years ago, and quite honestly, we couldn't compete in the market, and it sucked. Right? But my feeling is nothing risked, nothing gained, and we learned from it.
And what did you learn from it?
Lots of things. One of the things is I learned that I don't ever want to stop taking risks because it didn't hurt all that bad. That we were able to direct our members to other resources. It wasn't that they didn't have access to the tools. I learned that I probably needed to be more prepared and do better work up front in my partnership development, ironically. Thought you did enjoy that one. And that we took on too much at that time. And so it was an opportunity. We believed in it. We believed in the partners, and we all realized that we were not able to compete in that market, and we still have great relationships. So.
And did you publicize that?
No, I'm not. No,
so you don't put out a failure. You never put out a failure report.
No, although I think it's really a great idea, and if I had the capacity to do that, I would love to. Right?
Okay.
Like Engineers Without Borders does failure reports, and they do brilliant, beautiful things. And we're lucky if we have time to debrief on the learnings to be able to integrate that. And I think that having a learning organization, an organization that's really focused on improvement, as well as disruptive innovation, but also improvement in what we do, it really helps. And so we get better and more strategic and hopefully more resilient.
And I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, but while I do, I've been told to tell you that there's 2 microphones, one's there, and you can line up whenever you're ready to start asking questions. We'll open it up, and maybe we can do-si-do between you and me. So when you're ready to start asking questions, jump up. Because you guys are here to hear from her, not from me. So I wanted to ask you, you've expanded from your first CSI on Spadina, and now you're opening your 5th, soon opening your 5th, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what you learned from Regent Park, which is extremely different, a neighborhood, and then what you learned from New York, which is a whole, like the big apple.
Yeah, that's huge. I think one of the things that is constantly refining what is the essence of us. Many years ago, I presented the constellation model to an amazing woman named Ruth Armstrong, who's a professor up at York University, and she told me, she says, Tonya, I was writing a paper, and unlike you, I'm a terrible writer, not great. And so what was fascinating was, she says, Tonya, I need you to get to the essence of the model. And I think this question of what is the essence, and when you experiment and you push yourself and you apply the models in different applications, you start to understand what is indisputable, what is the core of the model. And that allows us to then be able to take not the whole kit and caboodle, but the essence of that model to the next level, and to try it a new way and a different way. But it's hard. And I'm not going to suggest in any way that this is easy. It's sometimes quite painful. You take steps, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and you feel, many days where you feel defeated, and then there's those other days where you're unlocking things. And I think, I think if you asked anybody who knows me, they would describe me as a deeply impatient human. And yet I think one of the things that is ironic is I think I have a very long vision. And I recognize that change, you pretty much have to dedicate 10 years to any change that you want to see. And we know that consistently over and over and over again. If you're actually interested in changing a system, 8 to 20 years is my guess. But I think if you budget 10, you might be able to start to see some real change. And so that's why this model, this question of shape becomes so important. Because you are also balancing the capacity building piece with the entrepreneurship piece, right? It's this complementary pair, this tension between building the foundation and leaping ahead opportunistically. And so, I think it's Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, right? Reid Hoffman. His line was, the entrepreneur is the one who jumps off the cliff and builds the airplane on the way down. And that is kind of my life, pretty much.
Okay, But what did you learn in Regent Park, and what did you learn in New York?
Yeah, okay. Oh, you mean,
What are the differences?
Damn,
Yeah.
these probing journalists. Look, we learned a ton. We learned a ton in Regent Park, and we really questioned whether or not we have the capacity to do, the question of, is our model the right model for the need in that community? And I think we struggle because our model is really one where we expect people come to us. And so we create a space, a magnetic attractor, a platform, and we think that they're just going to come in. We have this vibrant culture, and they'll just gravitate to us. And the truth is that works a lot of the time, most of the time. And so this has been a very different journey where we're learning how to reach out differently, learning how to connect differently, understanding what is the relevance of what can we offer in what we do in Regent Park that will be relevant to the community in Regent Park. And I don't think we know fully.
Is it a financial issue, or do you think in that?
Well, I'll tell you an experiment that Adil's leading right now, which is that we're doing a project called, it's Regent Park Potlucks. Did I get it right? Regent Park Potlucks, and this is our invitation to members of the community to join us in a potluck in Regent Park.
A salad club, more or less, right?
It's a salad club, but I think it'll be a dinner. So
Okay.
radical new shift, right? We're
Right.
going to dinner. And I think what's been very interesting is the incredible intention that the team has brought to invitation. So I think one of the learnings that we're having is that we need to invite. We need to invest in that invitation in order to make those connections.
So it's not build it and they will come there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And
in New York?
Yeah, in New York.
Wow, they move fast there, eh? Like that's the really interesting. I mean,
they must come fast.
They come and they
Right.
come and they're fast and furious, and they have a very short attention span and a very little tolerance for our own learning process.
Oh, I see.
So it's a very interesting and an amazing experience. I mean, the caliber of members, the speed, the ambition of the people in New York is ridiculously exciting. It's mesmerizing, and you feel that sense of potential. But I think one of the things that has been an interesting learning for us is, we're having to adapt there faster than we've ever had to adapt before, and that's straining us. It strains our ability to understand our core, and there's so many pretty objects everywhere that the ability to be distracted by the new pretty sparkly thing is really pushing us to understand what is our core.
So can you give us one example, like you gave in Regent Park?
Of something that we're doing.
You said that
there.
they're going so fast that
Yeah.
you can't really deliver what they want as quickly as...
Take social finance, right? This is an area of something that we do we have our own little piece of here in a Toronto context with the community bond and the microloan, the Catapult Microloan Fund, and the kind of way that we support entrepreneurs. One of the trepidations that we've had in New York is if we enter into the fray around social finance, will we be judged because we don't have something concrete to deliver right here, right now? And so there's such a pressure in that context to move faster. And so it's an interesting question. It's actually forcing us to really understand that essence. And maybe more concretely, we made a decision, an example. We made a decision to bring somebody in as an innovation fellow in New York. It was one of our fast moves, right? We were like going to take a risk, put it out there. We thought this woman was, amazing, well-connected, incredible. We had her come in, we do the little announcement, everybody's good, everybody's happy, and then we find out later that actually this person is not well-respected in the community. We made a bad choice, and this person is has basically undermined our brand and our reputation. And that is that was a casualty of that moving quickly without understanding the context. And so this question of the pressure to move quickly but not fully getting the political dynamic has put us into, interesting, How's that for the full reveal? Am I doing good? Yeah?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Oh, look, there's someone with a
good.
question. Welcome.
Hi, I'm more curious about the shape, harnessing our self-interest for collective impact. Like, how do you see the shape going? Is it more local and then global? Can you just comment a little bit more on it?
I mean, as I say, I really think that there's a whole learning journey around which shapes why and how, and we see that dialogue happening through complexity theory and through technology and understanding the impact. I guess my own belief is one of 10,000 flowers blooming. I am as equally obsessed with supporting the small as I am obsessed with transforming the large. And I think that, I bias for action and probably don't have nearly the critical thinking skills that I should in terms of the analysis piece. And so I guess I'm really okay with everybody coming at this question of how we change the world from their own perspectives. I think that diversity of perspectives is actually one of the beautiful and profoundly valuable design principles, actually, that will allow us to find the innovations that will have the potential to really change the world. And so I'm ridiculously optimistic, but at the same time, I can be really quite negative too. So, and I think that negativity is what really helps me craft the shape. But I really do think it's about trial and error, lots of experimentation, but I think you need to start with what you're great at, right? And I think what you're great at and what pisses you off are the two most powerful, energetic sources. And so, I think you need to tap into what really, really annoys you or what really drives you to greatness.
Okay, so then a quick follow-up. How do we bias for all the people coming together from their greatness? Do you have any comments on that?
Great question. One of the things is about transparency. And so one of the practices is how do we reveal the assets? How do we reveal the assets in our ecosystem? How do we understand and create the trust, the true trust in relationship that allows people to open up and honestly put that self-interest on the table so that we can see it and so that we can align it? Now let me give you I'll give you an example. Beautiful example from many years ago, but it was about the Canadian Environmental Law Association, an amazing organization that does like deep, deep policy work on toxics, and the Canadian Child Care Federation, which does amazing educational work. Now what was fascinating is when we first got to know one another, these were competitors in Kipchi. And what was interesting was what we started to see was that CCCF, the Canadian Child Care Federation, did excellent work educating their members. They had members of childcare workers across the country, but they really actually didn't know very much about policy. And what was fascinating is on the CELA's side, the Canadian Environmental Law Association, they were ridiculously good at policy, but they were constantly trying to do education campaigns, and the truth is that they weren't all that good. And so what was interesting was watching as each of these organizations was trying to expand their range of activities to be able to meet their audience needs. And in so doing so, they were ultimately diluting their effectiveness in that one area that they were excellent at. So we did an exercise with all of the partners where we had them all identify what were their core competencies, what were they excellent at, and where did they feel that they needed help. So it's needs and opportunities sort of analysis. And what was really amazing was to watch how completely separate from toxics, the two organizations started to use each other to be able to fulfill the requirements on the other side. So all of a sudden you had the Child Care Federation's marketing and campaign staff working on CELA's water work, which had nothing to do with toxics, and vice versa. You had CELA being able to provide policy support to the Canadian Child Care Federation and to start crafting deeper policy papers to educate those members. And so why I love that story is because it was through that social capital that we were able to see what the assets and challenges were for each of these organizations, so that they really had the opportunity to align their expertise and their self-interest to be able to create small little efficiencies that then led to bigger and bigger impacts.
So, climate change. You had that in one of those slides. I think one of your first slides was climate change, and that's the ultimate system change, which I would say that our self-interest has prevented us from moving on. Can we do another slide of how self-interest will actually create system change around climate change in your optimistic mind?
I'm no expert on climate change.
We'll just throw some spaghetti on the wall.
Sure, some spaghetti. So, I mean, you know, the thing that's interesting, you know, one of the challenges around climate is around our ability to envision past our own self-interest, right? I mean, it really is such a fascinating challenge to my whole presentation, actually, you know, I think about it. But I think one of the things that's amazing to see, I don't know if you heard the news today, but Canada is the number 5 biggest, the 5th largest, our country's invested the 5th most in renewable energy and climate change alleviation in the last year. So what's fascinating is that we're starting to see the market transformation. We're starting to see, with the Green Energy Act, the creation of incentives and programs that are helping to move the self-interest of businesses towards the climate change imperative. Now, it's an interesting question of whether or not we can embrace the potential of carbon pricing quickly enough, whether carbon pricing is going to be enough. How do we integrate full cost accounting into every single one of our decisions? So what's interesting about a lot of the things around climate change and some of our largest challenges is not that we don't know the answers to what the shape might be. It's that we haven't developed the political imperative to back it with the kind of agency that says we care about our future. And so the interesting question, I think, for us from a shaping perspective is, how do we, you know, my last line is really, it's up to us. And one of the things which is so exciting, I spoke at the Green Living Show last week, and the sense of futility with the policy makers and the sense of agency and drive from the entrepreneurs was palpable. And you see clean tech clusters like they have right here at Mars that are jumping on and are pushing and pushing. And so, you know, one of the things is, in this case, I think it's really a question of how do we start removing the barriers to let these shapes get into the market so that we can actually start testing the impact. And I think that this is going to be, we have to make it in the politicians' self-interest to be able to put these processes and these new shapes into practice. That's my incredibly ill-informed and uneducated spaghetti on the wall.
I know some people here. Oh, go ahead. I promised I would open up the.
Hamoon's going to ask me a real doozy. I just know it.
Hi, Tonya. Thank you so much for that powerful talk. My question for you is around, so it really resonated, given current reality of the world, that one of the best ways we could create the kind of change we need is to harness the power of self-interest. What I'm curious about is whether you see any role in the work we do, if you want to call it elevating the human consciousness or the human capacity. Is there a parallel path and a role in raising and in the long term transforming our humanity's ability to put others' well-being and systems' well-being above and beyond the self-interest? Or should we just assume that forever self-interest will rule and operate on that? So I'm just curious about, makes a lot of sense given current reality. Do we have a long-term play in transforming human consciousness?
I mean, I think to answer your question, we need both. and we always will need both. And I think that, you know, the slide around structure and flow, around that dynamic of that yin-yang, you know, is the real takeaway. We have to be able to handle and honor both sides. And so, you know, absolutely, we have to elevate the game and our humanity and allow and inspire future generations to be able to bring that genuine sense of compassion and caring into everything we do. And we're in a bit of a hurry. And so we also need to understand that not everybody is as informed as we are about these imperatives, and they're going through life in a pretty straightforward, simple kind of way. And those of us who have the privilege of being able to work on these very, very important issues, it is up to us to be able to create things that they don't have to feel. We don't need them to all be thinking about this. If we did, and if we design a world where they all have to think about it as much as we do, it'll never work. And so it's kind of like, you know, we've got to create the new cool, right? I mean, so I'll just say really quickly, and we got two really good, I'm really excited about the questions, but I'll just say, you know, change happens in one of three ways. Here's another doozy. You ready for this one?
Got my pen ready.
You got it, right?
Yeah.
And this is just my own little analysis. I'm sure I'm wrong, and you know the people will correct me, and I beg you. But what the hell? Let's go. Policy change, right? We can change the world through policy. We can create new rules which get at things, and those policies can be incentive, they can be regulatory, they can be all sorts. But there's policy change. There is market transformation. We are alive with market transformation. And it's happening, and it's exciting, and the entrepreneurs are ready to go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And then there's the third way, which is behavior change, and that is cultural. And it is profoundly vital that we don't lose sight of the need for us to change our behavior, become more inspired, more engaged, and more able to make the choices. And I'm seeing incredible shifts in the way that our priorities are changing as a society, as we move from more to meaning. And it gives me incredible hope.
Wow, that was cool. Hi. Yeah, you're next.
Hi, Harriet. I think it's on.
It should still be on.
It's
Is it on?
Yeah.
It's on? Okay. Wow, it keeps moving, what I want to ask or say. The last thing you said is really great, government, business, behavior. And I think I'm going to propose that we kind of think about things maybe backwards. We think of entrepreneurs as being the most innovative, but that maybe if we can be innovative in policy, that's where I'm picking up on your last statement, that the design principle can come to the fore. And I'll just give an example of where I see it operating right now, and particularly in the shift from hierarchical, which I think our market system really is, to distributed systems. And that is the Green Energy Act, which also had some real fall downs, I think, in terms of behavior, which was about education. But the design principle itself was that instead of the old hippie way of we're going to get off the grid, right, we're going to build earth ships and stuff like that. This is so brilliant. As far as I know, it was invented by the Greens in Europe. The idea that, no, we can make energy go both ways, but we need actually a policy change with or without the incentives. The incentives help. But basically, it's the infrastructure. When I put solar panels on my roof, the government, somebody, OPG or whatever, Toronto, had to come and put a wire to go the other way, and it can be done with reverse metering. But there's an actual physical infrastructure that allows me to be a producer and a consumer at the same time. Now that's design. To me, that's the rope that you've got there, or the lemniscate, or the yin-yang symbol. And that's really, I think, what design is. And so what happens then is a different incentive structure gets set up, and that's what changes behavior. And then the experience of changing behavior changes how we think. how we think about what our interest is. And that's the final thing, which is our interest really is in surviving and in recognizing that we are all interdependent, so that self-interests and common interests are not really different. It's about the scale of the thinking in time and in space. So those are some kind of thoughts, because I think the design point that you're making, which is absolutely brilliant and central, kind of needs to be grounded in the building that you've got, you know, in the services that allow people to congregate. Like, I don't know enough about CSI, but my experience of it is that the idea of platform and the idea of design is both material and social, and that's what allows for the culture change, which can, of course, be enhanced or fall down.
That's right.
At the same time.
And I mean, I guess I'd just say, I mean, yes, and absolutely. And I would just say, you know, sometimes the culture change does come first, though. And what's exciting and interesting is to believe and to really embrace that, you know, social movements create behavior changes well before policy can ever even think about catching up. And so all avenues are possible. And it's really strategy and shape which allows us to understand. Markets are beautiful because they can be shaped. You know, policy is beautiful because it can be shaped. And behavior change is a little more challenging sometimes because it's hard to control, but we have to bias for action instead of control. And so the conversation, it's better to be having it than to not be having it. And so engaging in that evolution. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, it's a beautiful to imagine, and I could spend the rest of my life just dreaming up new shapes and systems that, you know, like taxation. I'd love to take on taxation, or the job, the concept of the job. How broken is that? And how do we start to actually go back to some of the core principles, like why do we have a job? What's the point of a job? What if we were to actually start looking at changing the systems to get the things we need that a job we think gives us, that it doesn't? The false promise of that. And so I guess I just, you know, maybe it's a little bit heady, but I do like to go back to what we're really trying to get at and start to question, because it's only when we question these things that we have the ability to think differently and to shape them a little bit differently. Yeah.
You're next.
I changed my question like 3 times. I have 5 or 6, so I'll just pick one. So my name's Chris. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Chris.
When you talk about the different types of change, I've always been, I guess, the most interested in behavior change, which might be because, you know, I'm too lazy to do policy and too fearful to do entrepreneurship. I don't know, but I'm interested in people and behavior, and I'm interested in multiplier effects. And so I was curious, in your experience and the experience of the people that you've, you know, run with and jammed with, what has been the most impactful, I guess, either shapes or strategies or just things that you tried that worked in impacting behavior change in a really big way? Because I think that certainly the organizations that seems to me that do it well, part of the key seems to be to get people while they're young. And I think part of it also is to really do something that's big and grabs attention, but maybe you don't always have the money or the capacity to do something big, and maybe you don't only want to be directing your attention to young people. So I'm just curious what your thoughts on that are.
You know, I'll just be really honest. I'm a lousy critic, and so in my heart, I'm an entrepreneur, and so I have fallen on the side of building and creating, as opposed to the critical thinking that I think is so vital to the behavior change. And so, you know, I've played with policy change quite a bit. I love that change. And so I'll just say, I can't speak from a personal place. I don't think I've had the privilege, I would love to, of being involved in a major behavior change. But I'll tell you the one that comes to my mind that blows my mind, that I love. And that is the, okay, Tim Draymond, you may have to help me here, but the Forest Ethics Victoria's Secret campaign.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Who remembers that campaign? Now, this was a profoundly beautiful campaign, because it was basically protests. I'm going to get all the stats wrong, but bear with me. I think there was something like 500 protests that happened from young people protesting outside of Victoria's Secret stores. So very visceral, that protest movement. And what was powerful is that they were basically protesting against the end user of the old growth forests through the magazine industry.
The catalogs.
The catalogs. And it was art. It was, you know, we should have awards for perfection in campaigns, right? It was beautiful because it triggered the market forces. It intersected with public opinion. It was also very sexy. A woman in a sexy little lingerie with a chainsaw. Do you remember that? It was so good. It was so like provocative. And so what was beautiful was the intersection of how they actually engaged in a strategic dialogue, putting pressure onto a corporation that was and actually created a conversation. And they built the social capital, and they built the relationship, but they had the power of that protest and in their back pocket. I thought that was beautiful. I watch, and I've been connected and watching the Occupy movement, fascinating, what the learnings were, what they aren't there. But I think, look, I think there is, in the future, we've had some great runs at these campaigns. I think we have to up our game. There's more to be done, and I am strongly in favor, not just of the young people. I think what we're going to see is the old people. And you know why? Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, there you go. And you know why? Because the raging grannies tell the truth.
They're wrong.
Yeah,
Damn
that's
it.
true.
Right?
But, I mean, you didn't mention like basic behavior change. Like I lived in West Africa last year, and there's not a single seatbelt. And my kids would be like, let alone there's no chairs for your kid, your baby,
right. Yeah.
but there's no seatbelts. And the doors open, you know, when you turn the corner of the cabs. And then, so my children have never been in a car without using a seatbelt. And I grew up in like the in the sedan, everyone got in the back and we carpool. Yeah. That's a huge behavior change that's happened in our lifestyle. Littering, huge behavior
Organic
change.
food, where'd that come from?
Separating your, you know, recycling.
Smoking, yeah, Harriet.
Smoking, we would all be smoking right now.
Amazing campaigns, you're right.
Yeah. You're going to be our last question because that number says 241. Yeah. And then I want to take the last one. So make it quick.
Hi, Tonya.
Hi.
I have the distinct pleasure of being a member of CSI. I'm also a for-profit business that's here to support nonprofits and social innovators. One of the challenges I've noticed over the past little while is I loved your presentation because I'm like, thank God, she gets it. But one of the challenges I've noticed in my business model, my business plan is there's an imbalance in the nonprofit sector. We have the Davids and the Goliaths of this industry. Mm-hmm. Some of them understand this self-interest model very, very well, and they're very, very profitable. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things I'm seeing, especially, and I had the privilege of being at the CSI Summit today, is the grassroots organizations, these people who are passionate, who are driven. Unfortunately, passion is not profitable. How are we going to embody these grassroots, that 95% that aren't represented properly, to turn that passion into profitability?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Yeah, see, we've got another. So, you know, why I started CSI was that. So one of the most frustrating things and where I get my rage from is exactly what you're saying. How come it is that the ridiculously small, deeply passionate organizations have such a hard time figuring out how to work together? And how do we build a coalition, an integration model, a new shape that holds and honors this incredible energy and passion and is applied to the change that we want to see? I think we've got a really great design challenge on our hands, and it's not going to be easy. And one of the things that's really challenging, I'll just throw it out there, it's 38 seconds, and you want a question.
Well, I wanted to ask what you're doing next.
Yeah. It's just this question, well, not quite ready for this one, it's a big one, is this question of how we, oh, I forgot the answer. Shoot, it's gone. It was there and it was gone. But you know what, I hear what you're saying, and I think the question of how we manage all of the different, one of the challenges of the nonprofit sector and these small organizations is that we are so egotistical about our own social impact. And until we're able to take our own ego and really find a way where we can deeply collaborate, the challenge here is we've got self-interest. And sometimes we're paid in recognition or in ego satisfaction or a sense of ownership instead of figuring out how we can add value to a collective. And that is a design challenge, and it's super hard, but I think we're up for it.
Maybe we should teach many of these grassroots organizations to have the same self-interest model.
Yeah, well, let's talk.
So the clock goes the other way now.
Did it go the other
That's
way?
awesome.
Excellent.
So we're running up the clock, but I
We have
think
another
everyone here
75
wants to
minutes.
know what you're doing next. I want to know, like, what's CSI's next, what's your next big project?
Yeah.
What's your next big challenge, too?
There's a few that I can't really talk about, but there's a few that I can. And, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is, we started CSI 11 years ago, and we have been doing an amazing job. I really feel the team has really rocked it in removing barriers and helping to accelerate the success of our members. But there's no question that I think we have the opportunity to be more intentional about how we bring our members together to become more active in problem solving real challenges in the world. And I think that 192, the new building, provides us with an incredible opportunity to take our rich learning around social capital and really bring in these concepts of clustering and really become much more focused on how we're bringing people together around climate change or around the unjob or around social enterprise and how we become more sustainable. And so my hope and my dream and the next sort of design challenge is one of how do we bring the power of intention to clustering, to social capital, and start to bring this passion together to actively solve real problems in the city and the world. So I'm pretty excited and pretty scared. So it's just another risk, so what the hell, let's just try it.
All right, well, I think that we're going to explode soon. So we better get off the stage because it now says 0.
Perfect.
It was a pleasure chatting to you as always. Nice to be here. Have a great night.
Thank you all very much.